Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories that happened while alone at night. You're in for a real treat. I would also like to wish a very happy birthday to Maisie and James Thatcher, who are a lucky 13 years old today. I hope you've had a wonderful day and enjoy these stories too. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It started last February, when I moved into a tiny upstairs apartment, into a quiet neighborhood. I was reclusive by nature, hated small talk, hated attention. And it was the first time I had a space of my own, and I was desperate for my own peace and solitude. My landlord Olivia was a kind older woman who reminded me a bit of my grandmother. She was chatty, a little nosy but in a sweet way, and she didn't mind renting to someone like me, a quiet girl who kept to herself and paid rent on time. Every now and then Olivia would leave food outside my door, home-cooked meals, usually something hearty. She'd always write a post-it note with a smiley face. It became our routine. She'd knock once and walk away, and I'd find a warm dish waiting for me. In the morning I'd leave her empty Tupperware outside my door, and by noon it would be gone. We never really spoke, and honestly, that's how I liked it. I worked from home and rarely went out unless I really had to. I avoided the other tenants in the building, and I was living the exact way I wanted to, quiet and alone. But by April, little things started bothering me. It started with stuff going missing, a spoon, a sock, a roll of toilet paper, just enough to question my sanity. Sometimes I'd find my things moved. My toothbrush was damp even when I hadn't used it, or the remote control would be in the wrong place, or my shower curtain would be drawn when I always left it open. I chalked it up to the stress of the move, maybe the new meds. I was taking anti-anxiety pills that made me drowsy as hell, and I started falling asleep during the day. It was embarrassing, honestly. I once dozed off in the middle of an episode of Portlandia and woke up 4 hours later. But one day something happened that made my blood run cold. Olivia had brought me a Greek salad and some kind of homemade dressing. I ate it, passed out, and woke up late in the evening groggy and confused. I turned and noticed the left side of my bed looked disturbed. I never slept that side. I always curl up on the right. It's a habit I've had since I was a kid. The sheets were creased like someone had been lying there recently. They even felt slightly warm. My heart started to race. I tore through the apartment, convinced someone had broken in. I checked every closet, every cabinet, but nothing was out of place. Every door was locked. I even checked under the bed. For the next few weeks I tried to dismiss it, but more weird things started happening. My underwear began disappearing. And not just my clean ones, my dirty ones from my hamper. My toothbrush felt used, and I found my hairbrush damp in the morning. The whole apartment started smelling weird, like a heavy musky scent that lingered in the mornings. I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't want to tell anyone, especially not my parents, because I was afraid I'd sound crazy. And in May, it all escalated. I came home one afternoon, and something just felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. My anxiety was through the roof. I packed a bag and called my mum, begging to come home for a few days, and when I arrived, I spilled the beans. And saying it out loud made it real, and I realized it didn't sound so insane after all. My dad listened, then said he was going to go check the apartment out himself. He didn't make it past the hallway. When he opened the front door, he saw the walls, my clean white walls covered in words written in black Sharpie, smeared across nearly every surface. "Come back. I miss you, baby. Why won't you talk to me?" He ran out and called the police immediately. The apartment was empty, but someone had clearly been living there in my space every single day. The investigation moved fast. They found a small sleeping bag tucked behind the water heater in the hall closet, food wrappers, tissues, and a stack of my underwear, even hair taken from my brush and drain. The leftovers Olivia had been giving me were tested and confirmed to have been laced with benzodiazepines. I'd been drugged over and over again. The man's name was Henry. He was Olivia's son. Apparently he had mental health issues and hadn't been in contact with his own family for years. But a few months earlier he had moved back in with his mother and taken an unhealthy interest in me. He'd stolen his mother's spare key, and every day while I slept off the drug food, he would come into my apartment. He thought we were in a relationship. He told police he would lay next to me, stroke my hair, kiss my shoulder, and that we had an understanding. He claimed I gave him permission. When they showed me his taped confession, I vomited and couldn't even look at the screen. Probably the most frightening part is that I never saw him once, not even a shadow. He managed to completely integrate himself into my life without my knowledge. He had watched me, touched me, possibly lived in my closet, and I was none the wiser. They arrested him, of course. He was convicted but only served a few months before he was released to a halfway house. And he was found dead shortly after that. He had taken his own life via rope. I should have felt relief. I should have celebrated. But when my mum called me to tell me he was gone from this world, I broke down crying in the middle of a grocery store aisle. I don't know why I grieved for a man I didn't know. For the version of him that might have existed before the sickness, perhaps. It was complicated. But I don't sleep well anymore. I double-look everything. I don't accept food from neighbors, no matter how kind they seem. And I never assume I'm truly alone. And that's the part that hurts the most. This took place around 10 years ago, and I'll never forget it. I was 21 at the time, female, and was still fairly new in my city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship and wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town beside my ex and his friends. I was on a dating app, honestly looking for people to hang out with casually. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy, Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He explained he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. It was just audio on YouTube and was heavily edited with a still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments. One of them looked like him. The music was an interesting combination of styles, but not really for me. But whatever, he seemed like a nice enough person. He stopped replying for a few days and I figured that was it and moved on. Then one day, I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry he'd been so busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He had explained that their band manager was providing them a house to live in. Based on the lack of views on YouTube and the fact I only saw one photo of him playing in the band, I figured he was probably exaggerating the band manager thing. I thought it was more likely something along the lines of a bar manager friend trying to get them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band at their bar or something, but didn't really think of it beyond that. Normally, I would have just said no to going to a barbecue alone at a home of someone I didn't really know, but I was really bored and figured I might be able to overcome some social anxiety, and maybe even make some female friends, since he made it sound like it was going to be a pretty big party. I put the neighborhood he gave me into maps, and it was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I figured being in a yard on such a nice summer day wouldn't be overall risky, because lots of neighbors would be outside. Plus, it was just a few train stops away from my workplace, and I was off in a few hours. I did tell him I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea, since I didn't know him well, but I would stop for a bit. I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He said that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better. I even made sure not to drink anything for the rest of my shift, so I wouldn't risk needing to go inside to use the restroom. I was anxious about just showing up at a barbecue with people I didn't know, as he implied that the event was already underway, plus I would have a hard time finding a specific address from the backyard side, so I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station, since he said it was a quick walk anyway. He agreed to do that, and I let him know when I was leaving work, and what time maps said the train would get me to the station. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the train station at around 5:30. After I looked around, I couldn't find him. He told me he was running behind and just to start walking towards the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering towards me. I recognized his clothes, wearing bell bottoms when they were not common, especially for men, and long hair from far away. But close up, his face looked pretty different from his photos. It might have been some heavy editing, I don't know, but he kind of looked like a different guy, older than the 25-year-old guy in the pictures by at least 5 to 10 years. Maybe he used photos of his brother or something, I don't know. This was the days before AI, and it was the first real red flag, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just self-conscious. Maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen and hadn't taken pictures in a while. All of his pictures looked candid, so I figured he wasn't much of a selfie guy. And besides, I'm mostly here to make friends anyway, so I shouldn't judge his appearance so harshly. He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem strange. He's hosting a barbecue after all. The second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he assured me that we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard. We would have had to backtrack, go to the main road, go down the alley to the backyard. I figured he just forgot what I said about not wanting to go inside, but didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I just went in. We got into the house and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and knob behind me. I didn't think that was too odd since no one was hanging around inside, and a lot of people just have the habit of locking the door when they come in, but it did still give me the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then Simon told me he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just there for the barbecue. He said that him and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house ready and he was proud of it. At that point I was getting really skeptical, because usually when guys would tell me things that seem a bit far-fetched, they'd let the truth slip by the time we got to their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in the stupid house anyway. He insisted I'd be quick. Not the wisest choice, I know, but I was pretty good at explaining away red flags at this point. Simon still mostly had a dopey stone rock guy kind of act, as far as I was concerned. He didn't seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who sucks at communicating and lies a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotionally and verbally abusive, but never escalated past that. I figured at worst he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at the time, obviously, so I went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully. Other than that, the decor in the common area was obviously chosen by middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiasts and not a bunch of guys in a band and their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse. On the one hand, he was clearly lying, but on the other hand, it made me think this was probably just someone's mum's house, and she was out of town and he didn't want to tell me he lived at a friend's parents' house or something. The bedroom doors were all closed, the bathroom was unremarkable. He then showed me the kitchen, and finally I saw through the window that there was no one in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around, no burgers thawing on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around, nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue, and he told me that him and his bandmates were still on tour, and they're just running behind due to van trouble, but they should be back any minute and that we should start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them if he's part of the band. I can't even remember his answer, because it didn't make any sense. At that point, I'm out of my mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of crap, and I'm really starting to get scared. Took me long enough, I'm smarter now, don't worry. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I hoped that once he was done with the tour, we could just go outside, even if it was just for a minute, and I'd just leave. I've been in some sketchy situations in the past, but luckily nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't comfortable doing it inside the house. I knew this guy was full of crap, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. I instinctively pretended to believe this. He offered me a beer. I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning, and he said okay and cracked one for himself. Then he wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was dark and kinda creepy with really small windows, so I refused. I asked if we could go back outside, and he said after the tour. I tried to argue about going into the basement, told him I have spider phobia and didn't like basements. All lies, but anything that wouldn't let him realize that he was what I was afraid of. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured it would be better to just let him show me the damn basement, and then hopefully we could go outside because I didn't really know what else to do. It was fairly unremarkable. Couch, TV, elliptical, until I noticed something that gave me chills. The house was probably built in the 90s or late 80s earliest. I saw a door that looked like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room at my grandma's house, the kind that only opens from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges, and it looked really out of place in this house. I would absolutely not go anywhere near that door. He opened it and told me it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away, and it did indeed look soundproof. It was about the size of a bedroom, and I could see a few guitars and amps in it, mattress toppers on the walls, no drum kit or recording equipment that I could see. He insisted I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door motioning for me to go inside. Holy hell, the alarm bells were really going off now. At this point I realized I could totally die in here if I'm not careful, and I turned around to run up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking me what was wrong, acting like I'm being so unreasonable for not wanting to go into his soundproof music studio. So now I realize that this is a way sketchier situation than any of my ex's BS, and I freaked right out. At that point, my main objective was to get out of the house. The front and back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run out, he'd be able to get to me before I could open them. The bathroom did not have a window. The house had a convoluted floor plan that I wasn't familiar with, and he was much larger than me. He was the tall, lanky type, who could run fast even if they're out of shape and smoke a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay to hang out with him in the hopes that he'd chill a bit. We made small talk for a few minutes, he cracked another beer, and thankfully he calmed down. I desperately mentioned again that it was beautiful outside and suggested we go sit in the yard while we wait. He said no and started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I just really wanted to smoke. He told me that we could smoke inside and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. Damn it. We sat down at the table, lit some cigarettes, and he was smoking. He started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as his cig was done. He offered me some, but I respectfully declined. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff I could. I'm a pretty seasoned weed smoker, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him that I'm a novice, and that was more than enough for me. For a lie himself, he thankfully wasn't that good at picking up on the lies of others. After we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I told him I was really looking forward to spending the day outside and suggested we go for a walk or visit the park. Ideas he did not like or appreciate. At that point I was trying to keep as much distance as possible between us, but he stayed close enough to me that I could smell the beer in his breath. He grabbed me by the waist, and I backed away and asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject and make him think I still believed what he was telling me. He began to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates would be home any minute, and my anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk. Now I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. At this point, he's getting even more pissed off than before. So I went out on a limb and suggested we go get some more beer for the party, because I was out of ideas. I was terrified that it would enrage him even more to suggest we leave the house, but I had to try. Thankfully though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan, because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this menace in this weird, desolate suburb. But I was extremely relieved to be at the house. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there, I told him I didn't need to go inside if he was just going to grab some beer. He insisted I had to go inside. At that point, I was so stressed out and frazzled, I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. Once we got inside the liquor store, he asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had work tomorrow and didn't want to drink much. He demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I named the first one that came to mind. We went to pay, and the cashier was kind of an arse, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have, but I panicked and didn't. I hoped there might be someone in the parking lot who could assist me if I made a scene, but there wasn't. I really regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help, but also remembered the time my ex told people I was crazy, so they wouldn't take me seriously. Liquor store guy definitely seemed like he would have fallen for that, so probably for the best I didn't expect him to help me. I had one last idea before I took my chances, just trying to run and/or scream. There was a drugstore across from the liquor store. I told Simon I had to go buy a toothbrush or something that vaguely implied I might stay over. He eagerly agreed to this, but tried to follow me into the store. I told him you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't even know if that's true, but I doubt it's any kind of law. And luckily the drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. Now my naive ass thought I could just wander around this drugstore for long enough that he would either get the hint or get sketched out or bored and leave, but no. I must have wandered around the store for about half an hour, and the guy was just standing there by the window. He didn't even have his phone out. Every time I checked if he was there, he was just staring through the window looking for me. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could call in the city to come help me. The cops here don't usually take things very seriously, and the store worker looked like they were mostly high school students, and I didn't want to drag them into this, so I didn't really feel like I had a lot of options. After being there for so long, I was surprised he didn't come in to see what was taking so long. I thought maybe I could lose him in the aisles and sneak out the store, but no hope. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting in their car who were now pausing to look at us before I nearly yelled at him, and then he just turned around and left. It was bizarrely anticlimactic, which I was very thankful for. I ran to the train station, which thankfully was in a different direction to his house from the store, and I never heard from him again. When I got home, his app profile had either blocked me or been deleted. Years after, I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing. I wish I could have reported him or something. It bothers me if he tried it again with someone else but made sure the fridge was stocked first. But at the time, I didn't think anyone would take me seriously. I was embarrassed of my choices and just wanted to move on from the whole thing. Plus, all I really had was a likely first fake name and a general idea of where the house was, which probably wasn't even his. So, Simon, I hope to never meet you again. I'm a 22-year-old guy living in one of Sydney's stranger neighborhoods. It's not exactly dangerous, but it does attract its fair share of late-night weirdos, if you get what I mean. Junkies, drifters, people who just generally seem off. You probably know places like it. Well, it never used to be a problem, but tonight, it scared the hell out of me, and you'll see why shortly. It was just before midnight. I'd stepped off the train and was on my usual 10-minute walk home. The air was quite chilly. You'd breathe and be able to see your own breath kinda chilly. And the streets were mostly empty, and there was an echo with every footstep of my shoe. I was walking quickly, focusing on the rhythm of my steps and the glow of the distant streetlights in the dark. When I noticed, I was catching up to someone ahead. He was wearing a huge bomber jacket, scuffed black boots, and was swaying side to side as he walked. His head jerked slightly with each step, and he was singing, something tuneless, muttering under his breath. I assumed he was just another local eccentric, probably drunk or high, and I tried to ignore him, wishing I hadn't forgotten my headphones. His voice grated on my nerves. We ended up walking side by side, not close enough to talk, but not far enough to feel comfortable. Just 2 meters of uneasy silence broken by his awful singing. Then, just ahead, a woman appeared. She stepped out from a side street. She appeared to be about my age, holding a stack of books to her chest. She looked a bit like a student. Jeans, hoodie, hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she nodded politely as she fell into place next to us. And then the singing stopped. The man turned his head towards her and in a raspy voice almost theatrically said, "Excuse me, why are you carrying a book about Bikram yoga?" His tone made my skin crawl. The girl was polite, saying she was studying to be an instructor. That's when the man smiled. "Oh, I'm a yoga instructor too." He didn't sound like someone who'd ever done yoga before in his life. I admit, perhaps looks can be deceiving, but even so. I slowed down just enough to stay near. I didn't want to talk to the guy. I hate confrontation, always have. But something about his tone and his body language and the way he was eyeing her up felt wrong. So I hovered nearby, pretending to be still, just to pass her by. Their conversation continued. His questions quickly went from vague to personal. Was she local? Did she live alone? Did she live with roommates? His voice never changed, but the words kept digging into her life, making her even more uncomfortable, and it made me nervous. I could see her tightening her arms around the books. Her pace quickened. She wanted to escape that conversation, but the man wasn't going to let her. And so did I. I was almost at my street. I could have disappeared into the safety of my home, but I looked back just to be sure. The man was now walking beside her, chatting softly, but in his left hand, the hand opposite her, there was a knife. A long one, not a pocket knife or something you carry for show. This thing gleamed under the streetlight. My stomach dropped. The guy looked at me, not surprised, not scared, but annoyed, like I was ruining his fun. He shook his head slowly, like he was telling me, "Walk away, this doesn't concern you." And then there were headlights across the street, parked halfway in the shadows. A dark blue car that I hadn't even noticed before. And now I saw a man in the driver's seat watching us. He didn't move, he didn't speak. He just stared, then raised one hand and slowly shook his head at me as well. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just some random creep. This was coordinated. It was a setup, a trap for this young woman. My heart was hammering and I was unarmed, powerless. I was standing in the middle of something terrible about to happen and I had no clue what to do. Then instinct kicked in. A flash of some article I'd read years ago about what to do when facing a bear, which is look big and be loud. I screamed. I raised my arms and screamed like a maniac, like a cornered animal. I charged towards him, teeth bared, every muscle trembling. The guy jerked back, and the knife disappeared into his coat as he bolted across the road. The car door flung open and he dove in. The silence afterwards was unreal. The girl looked at me pale and shaking, and she didn't say anything at first. She just held her books tighter. We called the cops. She thanked me. But when they asked me to describe the guy or the car, I drew a blank. My brain had seized up in that moment of panic, and I couldn't remember anything very clearly. But what haunts me the most isn't really what happened. It's what almost happened. If I hadn't have forgotten my headphones that night, if I'd have not paid attention to their conversation, and if I hadn't have looked back one last time, I wouldn't have seen the knife. I wouldn't have seen the trap. She might have just been some other person who disappeared off the streets, never to be seen or heard from again. Human trafficking is a real thing, and I'm pretty sure I saved that young woman's life. This past weekend, My Uncle Simon, who's always been the class clown, got quiet and serious for the first time I've ever seen him. He came over excited to see my new Infante G37, but as we stood outside popping the hood and pretending we knew what we were talking about, his usual laughter faded away and his voice lowered to a whisper. That's when he told me something that happened to him in college, something he'd never told anyone before. He said he felt like he needed to warn me, especially now that I'm a young guy with a new car and out on my own. It felt very abrupt, but I listened all the same. Back when Simon was in college, he went to a small rural one in a town with about 10,000 people. It was mostly students and some locals. He lived off campus about 3 miles outside of town, past the bar district where he spent the nights drinking with friends. When it was time to go home, he thought walking would clear his head. But that night, there was something about the night that felt different. The road was a thin ribbon cutting through endless cornfields, stalks towering like ghostly sentinels on either side, and when the dark hit just right, he could almost swear that it was like someone moving in the fields. Of course it was just corn, but it was the illusion it gave. The cold air bit at his skin, and the wind whispered through the dry leaves. His footsteps crunched in the gravel, and every sharp noise was echoing in the stillness. Then a truck appeared, old and rusted. The driver was a man with a weathered face and sunken eyes pulled up beside him. He smiled wide and offered Simon a ride. He was drunk and tired. Part of him hesitated. He looked at the man and just felt something off, but at the same time he was drunk and exhausted. And in the end, his drunkenness won over his unease, and he climbed into the cab. At first, the ride seemed ordinary, but the truck didn't turn where Simon expected. Instead, it kept heading down a narrow country road deeper into the darkness. The man insisted he knew a shortcut, something he'd driven for 50 years. Simon's unease grew into a cold pit in his stomach. The moon disappeared behind thick clouds, and the truck headlights barely cut the thick shadows of the towering corn. The silence was suffocating, only broken by the occasional creak of the truck's aging suspension and the low hum of the engine. After several minutes, the truck slowed, turning onto a cracked gravel driveway lined with gnarled, twisted trees. At the end stood a barn, rotten and half collapsed, its roof sagging. Beside the barn was a rusted playground, the metal chains on the swings creaking softly in the wind. The whole sight twisted Simon's gut. The truck came to a stop. Simon tried to open the door, heart pounding in his ears. The lock was sawed halfway off, the jagged metal shards scraping against his fingers like cold knives. Panic surged as he realized what this man had planned for him. From behind the barn, a faint yellow light flickered coming from a small shed. The only other light was the pale moonlight struggling through the clouds, and the feeble glow of the truck's headlights. The man's eyes locked on Simon's. Simon fought with everything he had, terror pumping adrenaline through his veins. He threw punches, shoved with desperation, and somehow broke free, running blind through the shadowed cornfields, branches clawing at his face, the ground icy and unforgiving beneath his feet. He didn't stop until the lights of the main road appeared, flickering like salvation ahead. To this day, he never said what happened in the barn or the shed, what the man wanted, or what might have been waiting for him there. The story ends abruptly, his hands trembling and voice barely above a whisper. The lesson? Never accept rides from strangers, especially when the night is dark and the fields are endless, because you never know who might be more than willing to take you a bit further than you expect. I pushed for more details, but he was reluctant to give them. I don't know what happened to my Uncle Simon. All that I know is that he managed to get out of there alive. I was 19, flying alone from East Malaysia to university in the peninsula. It was a late flight, my favorite kind, as it was quiet, dark, and easy to disappear into. But that night there was an unfortunate delay, and instead of arriving at midnight, we wouldn't be getting there until 2 a.m. This was the only way to get to Peninsula, as we were separated by water. No big deal. I'd planned to crash at the airport until morning. My assigned seat was the middle one, but when I noticed the aisle was empty, I took it. That's when I realized the man at the window seat was watching me. I avoided eye contact, pretending to sleep. A few minutes in, I felt freezing cold. I cracked one eye open and saw him adjusting both his and the middle seat's air vents to blow directly onto me, but I stayed still. Later, when the meal came, he tapped my shoulder. I hate being touched and flinched. "You don't have food," the man said, smiling. "Here, take mine. I can't eat when someone next to me is hungry." I declined, but he insisted. He unwrapped the meal, pulled down my tray table, and handed it to me like a waiter. He didn't start eating his replacement until I was finished. He just watched me, grinning sickly. Then he moved to the middle seat. His name was Sam. He told me he worked in Peninsula Malaysia, asked my name and if I was single, and what I was doing in the city. I answered briefly and politely. When I said I'd stay at the airport until sunrise, his tone changed. "No, that's dangerous. You can stay at my brother's condo, it's nearby. My sister-in-law's home. Don't worry, I'm a good guy." "No," I told him firmly, but he didn't stop smiling. When we landed, I tried to lose him in the crowd, but I had luggage. He kept pace, and without asking, held my hand like we were a couple. He walked beside me like we belonged together, past airport staff, past passengers, no one stopped us. Near the toilets, I told him I needed to pee. He refused at first, saying his brother was waiting, but I insisted. He sighed and took my luggage from me. I didn't want to leave it, my laptop was inside, but I had no choice. I hid in the stall, heart pounding. I thought about running, but my phone battery was dead. Then I heard the bathroom door creak open. "Hey, you okay? You've been in there a while." He said my name, and I nearly screamed. I stepped out and smiled as if nothing was wrong. The airport, of course, at 2:30 a.m. was practically empty. I couldn't see any security around, no staff who weren't swamped with stranded passengers, and he walked me to a black pickup truck. His brother was behind the wheel, watching me silently in the mirror, the entire hour-long drive. They brought me to a condo, and Sam led me upstairs. "My sister-in-law's away, but don't worry, you'll be safe here." He gave me his room, locked the door behind me when he left, and I sat on the bed, too scared to move, contemplating my life choices and wondering how the hell I'd just ended up in some stranger's home, in somewhere I didn't know, far away from where I wanted to be. An hour later, there was a knock. "Are you awake? I just want to talk." Then I saw the doorknob slowly start to turn. It was locked. Then came the jingle of keys. I panicked and opened it a crack before he could get in, and he smiled like always. "Why did you lock the door?" "I'm tired, I want to sleep." He pushed the door open and stepped inside and locked it again behind him. He sat on the bed and told me to sit with him. I stood. When I tried to leave, he grabbed my wrists and I screamed. His brother banged on the door seconds later, demanding to know what was going on, and I unlocked it crying and told him to take me back, to just get me away. Thankfully, he did. At the university gate, my guard wouldn't let the truck in, so I walked the rest of the way in the dark, heart pounding. I got back to my dorm and realized I still had Sam's IC, his ID card. I'd asked for it earlier, hoping it might scare him into backing off, and he gave it to me, smiling the whole time. I'd clutched it the entire time without even realizing it. He called the next day, texted, said we should hang out again, that he'd come to campus to find me, but I blocked him. I dropped out a few weeks later for unrelated reasons and moved back home. But I still wonder, what if I hadn't screamed? What the hell his plans were for me? I mean, at a surface level, I'm pretty sure everyone knows what he wanted from me, right? But what if there was something darker underneath? I still don't want to contemplate it. Remember, if a situation seems shady, don't go for it. Don't try and be kind and polite and just go along with it. Especially if you're a woman. Make a scene, scream, show that you aren't into that situation. It can save your life, or at the very least, avoid very uncomfortable situations. Stay safe out there, friends. Last fall, my parents and I took a short trip to Portland, Oregon. We stayed at a luxury hotel downtown, one of those posh high-rise places with polished marble floors and very expensive-looking glass elevators. I had just turned 17, and it was a kind of independence test. My parents agreed to book me my own room for the first time, just a few doors down from theirs on the 8th floor. It felt safe. The first night went by uneventfully. I gorged on overpriced chocolate almonds from the minibar and watched some horror movie that, ironically, didn't scare me half as much as what happened next. The following morning we had breakfast at the hotel's sleek, open-air restaurant overlooking the street below. That's when I noticed him. An older man, maybe mid-60s, sitting 2 tables over. Just sipping his black coffee and staring, not blinking, not pretending to look away when I caught him. I told myself he probably just thought I looked like someone he used to know. A granddaughter, maybe. I've dealt with creepy glances before, most women have, and I figured this was no different. But it left a weird taste in my mouth. That night, I met up with an old friend, Jaden, who went to a nearby college. We had dinner a few blocks away, then came back to the hotel to hang out in the lobby bar. Jaden's 6'3" and built like a linebacker, so I felt totally secure. Until I saw him again. Only this time there was no mistaking it. His eyes didn't waver from my body. He licked his lips once, in a very malicious way, slowly, and when our eyes met, Jaden noticed too. He leaned over and muttered, "That dude's giving me major predator vibes." Not long after we left, it was nearly 1 a.m., Jaden walked me to the elevator bank and gave me a hug before heading to our rotating doors. The second he was gone, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. He was there. He rounded the corner silently and stepped up beside me, waiting for the elevator like he'd been there the whole time. I stared straight ahead, pretending I didn't notice him. He was inching closer, invading my personal space. Then I noticed something else. He didn't press a button. He was planning to get off wherever I did. The elevator dinged, we stepped in, and I mashed the 8 button and he just stood there, hands in his coat pockets watching me. The ride felt like it lasted forever. At my floor I got out quickly, walking fast but not running. I looked back once and he was standing in the hallway, head tilted like a dog listening to a sound. But he didn't move. I slammed and locked my door, didn't even take off my shoes, just stood there and listened, trying to calm my breathing. After 15 minutes of silence, I peeked out the peephole. Empty hallway. I still didn't feel safe. I called my mum, explained what had happened, and she and my dad were alarmed but figured the man was likely a harmless weirdo. They reported it to the front desk. Security checked the floor but found nothing. Finally, I got into bed sometime after 2 a.m. That's when the knock came. It was soft at first, 3 slow taps. I sat straight up, my stomach flipped. Then came the second knock, much louder, more impatient. I didn't move. I just stared at the door, barely breathing. The third time, it was a pounding fist. I turned on the bedside lamp, creeping towards the door in socked feet. I didn't speak, but the knocking stopped, as the sound had scared whoever was out there. Then a voice, high-pitched and raspy. It sounded like someone was trying to mimic cheerfulness, but was horribly wrong. "Housekeeping, please let me in." My heart slammed in my throat. I looked through the peephole and of course, it was him. His face was pressed up against the door. His eyes were wide, lips stretched into a grin that didn't touch them. He was wearing a white hotel robe loosely tied, and nothing else. One hand behind his back. The other was, well, you can guess. I staggered away from the door and ran to the bathroom, locking it behind me. My fingers shook so badly I almost dropped my phone and I called my dad. "Dad, he's at my door, the man!" I heard my dad's door fly open from down the hall, then chaos. Shouting and a sickening thud and my mum screaming. When I cracked the bathroom door open, I could hear my dad yelling for security, his voice deep and furious. Turns out the man had managed to get a staff robe from a supply closet. Security later discovered he had tried earlier that day to get a key from my room, told the front desk he was my uncle and that I'd lost mine. I didn't give it to him, thank God, but he knew my room number. We think he had followed me earlier in the day and waited until night to act. My dad caught him in the act right outside the door. We all knew what he was doing with his hand. The other one was down his open robe, whispering something that sounded like, "So pretty, so pretty." My dad tackled him and broke his nose. Security arrived moments later, followed by the police. He's in prison now, awaiting sentencing on multiple charges including attempted sexual assault, trespassing and impersonating hotel staff. I still have nightmares. I triple check every door lock, and I'll never stay in a hotel room again. The summer I came home after college was supposed to be chill. A few months of internship hours before starting pharmacy school. What I didn't expect was to reconnect with an old high school flame, and what started as nostalgia quickly rekindled into something real. Real enough that years later I'm marrying her. Back then though, our relationship had to stay under wraps. Her dad was the old school, shotgun on the porch type, kind of protective. Not unkind, but definitely not someone you wanted to sneak past at night, which is exactly what I did. Night after night I parked behind her house on the barely used back dirt road, crept through the shadows, and slipped in through her bay window. I'd sleep beside her for a few hours and then vanish again before dawn. But one night, something happened. It started like any other. I kissed her goodnight around 3 a.m., slipped out into the suffocating darkness out there beyond the reach of the town lights. It was pitch black, and the only thing breaking the night was the harsh spotlight her dad had rigged to illuminate the back of the property. My car sat just past the fence line, swallowed by shadow. As I got closer, I noticed movement. A figure, pale, thin, and dressed in what looked like a filthy white nightgown. She was circling my car, not walking but gliding in a stiff, mechanical pattern. With every circuit she paused to press her face against each window slowly, like she was peering into a dollhouse. Her hair hung in thick, chaotic clumps, as if it had been yanked in every direction. She didn't seem to see me at first, but I saw her. And then she turned slowly. Her face pivoted towards mine like a marionette on a twisted string. Her gaze locked onto me instantly. Though her expression didn't change, her lips were drawn into a tight, sucked-in smile. Her eyes, unblinking, glazed, not dead but not human, seemed to look through me and not at me. I stumbled backward into the dirt, breath caught in my throat. She advanced soundlessly at first, then with deliberate footsteps crunching over gravel. She didn't run or scream, she marched. She loomed over me, mouth trembling and stretched, and then an unnatural scream emanated from her mouth. Her face twisted in a red, snarling mask, all the while staring at me. My legs moved before I could think and I ran back to the house, not caring if her dad caught me, not caring about anything, but the fact that there was something hideously wrong. Her footsteps thundered after me. Nonsensical, deranged sounds screamed from her mouth. I reached for the back door locked, no way of getting in through the window. I sprinted around to the front praying if the door was open, and it was. Her dad stood in the glow of the hallway light, smiling, not alarmed, not confused, just expecting me. "Come in," he said, waving at me with an amused nod. Before I could explain myself, he hushed me with a grin. "Listen." For the next 15 minutes, we sat in the dark of his dining room, sipping warm beer and listening to that woman scream at the trees. She does that a lot. We call her Jane. Apparently Jane had lived alone for years. No family came around, no help was accepted, and when the cops were called, she always snapped back enough into coherence to dodge intervention. She was untouchable, unless you were lucky enough to be out there alone at 3 a.m. She's not violent, but you saw her on a bad night. You'll be alright. I wasn't sure I believed him. He walked me to my car, told me to leave via the back route, windows open, and I did as he said. And then I saw her again, standing under the pitch-black outline of her porch, arms limp by her side, hair still wild and mouth moving, screaming at me through the windshield. My heart plummeted. Even in my car with the engine running, I felt no safer. I turned around and floored it out there in the normal way, not daring to pass her again. Months later, I learned Jane had slapped a kid selling cookies, finally giving the police enough reason to hospitalize her. By total coincidence or fate, I was interning in the psychiatric wing of that very hospital. One night, I had to refill the Pixis machine in the dark corner that lined the patient room. On my way out, I glanced at the grainy surveillance monitor at the nurse's station, and there she was, rocking, muttering, her mouth moving non-stop. I walked faster that night. Jane never returned to her house. Rumor has it she got back on her meds, and some long-lost relative offered to take her in, but she refused to leave that house. Years later, before my father-in-law moved away, he told me he had actually had a normal conversation with her, and she seemed lucid. But I'll never forget the look in her eyes when she found me in the dark, and I hope to never see it again. Around 2 years ago, I moved into a brand new house in a newly developed estate in Australia. I was among the first to finish building, excited to finally live on my own. For the first few weeks, everything was peaceful. I'd walk my dog in the afternoons, exploring the unfinished roads and empty lots. Only one other house stood nearby, directly across the street. It looked complete but had no driveway, no cars, and no sign of life. To the left of my house, a few hundred meters away, was a large hill surrounded by a chain-link fence. I later learned it was council land and off-limit. No one was allowed on it, though no one could say why. Beyond that, a few kilometers down the road, stood a crumbling farmhouse and shed. Abandoned. I'd occasionally walk there with my dog, more out of boredom than curiosity. A month or two in, I woke up one morning to the sound of a violin. I assumed the neighbors across the road had finally moved in, but when I peeked outside, their house remained just as lifeless as before. That was odd. So I got dressed quickly, threw on my shoes and left the house, but the music at this point had now stopped. This happened every other morning for about a week. The same haunting melody, always fading away before I could pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. One morning I heard the violin again and rushed outside. I was ready this time. There, on the off-limits hill, a figure stood tall and thin, slowly spinning as they played. The waltz-like movement was graceful and eerie. I looked away for just a moment to grab a paper. When I looked back, the music had stopped. The figure was no longer dancing and they stood perfectly still facing me. I couldn't make out the details in the dim light. We stared at each other until I got spooked and went back inside. I started noticing footprints after that in the dirt near my house that were not mine. Tools like spades or rakes appeared on empty lots. Despite no construction crew around, I stopped walking near the old farmhouse and began getting silent calls at work. Early some mornings, I swore I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window, but I never saw anyone. One night at around midnight, after turning off the TV, I heard the violin again. But this time it was muffled, mechanical like an old recording. Peeking out, I saw a flickering candle in the window of the vacant house across the street. Just the low, scratchy tune, and no movement. And after 10 minutes, the music stopped, and I saw the flame disappear. But I never saw a soul. I began inviting friends over to stay late, but nothing ever happened when someone else was there. I didn't tell them why. I didn't want to sound crazy. And then came the night I'll never forget. I was gaming late, lights off, headphones on. I got up to grab a beer from the fridge when I turned around. and I saw two faint glowing dots outside the small window beside my desk. I walked closer, puzzled. Only when I was nearly nose to glass did I realize they weren't lights, they were eyes, staring, unblinking just above the fence line. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Then I collapsed to the floor, scrambling out of view, heart pounding, as I lie flat against the carpet. That's when the violin started. Not soft or distant, but right outside the window. Furious screeching notes cracked and missed. It sounded angry. The pace quickened, strings scraping violently. My dog Jeb barked once, loud and deep, and the music cut off instantly. Then footsteps, slow and crunching, headed towards my backyard. I jumped up and bolted to the back door, and Jeb stood stiff, staring into the darkness. I slid open the door and tried to pull him inside, but he wouldn't move. When I tugged his collar, he let out a bark unlike anything I'd ever heard. We waited. Then the footsteps came again, circling away, distant. Eventually, Jeb relaxed. I locked every door and spent the night hiding under my blankets, fully grown and very afraid. I never saw the violinist again. I called the police next morning. They found footprints by the fence, but too many to identify. I told them the figure had to be over 6 feet in order to see over the fence. They said maybe he was standing on something. They had no reports of trespassers and no music complaints. They were kind, but clearly very skeptical. They patrolled for a few nights, out of courtesy, I guess, but nothing happened. In the months that followed, more families moved in. I told them the story. One neighbor nicknamed the hill Violin Hill, and that name stuck. Kids are still warned about it. I searched online for the melody and found similar pieces, but never an exact match. I started to believe it was original. That somehow made it worse. I still live here, still walk, but now I always close the blinds and try to avoid looking in that general direction. Fire is terrifying and merciless. It spreads fast, feeding on everything and leaving nothing behind. Unlike a person or animal, fire can't be reasoned with or predicted. I lived in my estate for over 11 years, and I've seen things, heard things that would make most people lock their doors in broad daylight. I've witnessed fights, raids, even watched a neighbor's studio bedsit get broken into the dead of night. But that's only partially related to this story. The story spans about 6 or 7 years and centers around someone we eventually called the Phantom Arsonist, a pyromaniac who haunted our estate with a sick obsession. Let me explain. In our estate, we kept our black and blue bins, domestic waste and recycling, in fenced-in areas behind each block. We take turns bringing them out front on collection day. I live in a 1-story block, ground floor, right at the front. It's a spot I use to feel lucky to have. My uncle lives in the same estate and has been here even longer. It started in late 2013. I had just purchased a new guitar and was working full-time and happened to have a day off. The night before, I'd noticed my 2 problematic next-door neighbors, 2 young lads, hauling out what looked like half a forest. Branches, dead leaves, dirt, dragged out of their flat and dumped near the bin area. I watched through the peephole confused. Who hauls woodland debris out of a city flat? Now, you might think I should have minded my own business, but these guys were known troublemakers. Loud arguments at night, sketchy visitors, police at their door more often than I care to count. So no, I didn't get involved. The next night, Monday, I was home, playing the guitar around 8 or 9 p.m, when I heard someone yelling from the hallway that there was a fire. I didn't hesitate. I had a mental checklist. I grabbed my guitar, my laptop, my phone chargers and bolted. When I stepped outside, I turned back towards the block and froze. The pile those 2 lads had dumped was engulfed in flames. A roaring wall of fire stretched up to the side of the building, right beside someone's ground floor flat. The speed and height of it was shocking. More residents gathered eyes wide, helpless. The fire brigade arrived just in time to stop it from reaching the interior, and once it was out, you could see the scorched black streaks licking up the wall. Oddly enough, those two lads never came outside. Even while the flames were climbing up the building, they stayed in there. Later I found out one of them was on a police tag curfew. Still, if your building's on fire, surely anyone can make an exception. Fires became such a regular occurrence, always at night, and always in or around the bin enclosure. Some were small, quickly extinguished, while others were dangerously close to being fatal. Communal meetings were held. Our landlord's representative showed up, so did a local beat officer and firefighter. They said the same things we always hear. We're investigating. Some individuals are being questioned. But no arrests were ever made. Eventually, the estate began to change. Bin enclosures were rebuilt, but this time with fences around them. There were 4 or 5 of these new areas scattered throughout the estate, but the fences did little to stop the fire. One blaze happened right outside the block opposite me. Flames licked up the side of the building and started melting the guttering. Another time, a fire cracked a window from the heat alone. Each time it came closer to someone's home. At some point, they tore down the fences and replaced them with brick walls. Plastic bins were swapped for huge steel ones, which helped somewhat. At least the fire didn't spread as quickly, but it kept happening, and no one saw who was doing it. There was this growing sense of paranoia. Whoever the arsonist was, they seemed to know the estate well, where the cameras were, when people were asleep, which areas were darkest, and residents chatted. Maybe someone from the estate, or someone with connections to it, but whoever it was, they were like smoke. Gone the next moment after the fire started. Eventually enough was enough. The landlord installed high-tech CCTV around the estate, real ones, not the cheap, crappy kind, and cameras were pointed directly at all the bin enclosures. That was 2 years ago, and since then, there's been nothing. No suspicious fires, no phantom arsonist, just one unrelated electrical fire in a flat on the first floor. A freak accident. One man was badly burnt, but everything else was fine. Looking back though, I wonder, if we'd have had those cameras for the start, how much fear and pain could have been avoided. Because living somewhere that you don't know if it's going to just go up in flames one day can be a pretty daunting prospect. Or the thought that you might get roasted alive in your bed while you sleep, or poisoned from the smoke because some twisted moron has an obsession with fire. What were their real plans? Did they want to see the estate burn to the ground? Did they want to kill someone? I have no idea. All I know is that I'm lucky that nothing terrible happened, and that I'm still around to share the story. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's installment of Scary Stories. If of course you did, some love and appreciation down below in the comments will never go amiss. Thanks guys. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you would like to join their ranks to get some cool exclusive perks, including but not limited to your birthday shout-out, the topic of your choice on your birthday, and a whole load of other cool exclusive perks, feel free to check it out. But that's it from me. I hope you will join me tomorrow for the very last episode of the June Content Bonanza. We're going to be heading to the road with some trucker stories. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.